Hello and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Relationships have the power to wound us and the power to heal us. As a clinical psychologist, author, and professor at Northwestern University, I've devoted my life to studying intimate partnerships and family dynamics. On Reimagining Love, I'm here to translate complex clinical topics into tools and takeaways that you can use in your relationships today. If you're ready to develop relational self-awareness and create vibrant and loving relationships with the people who matter most to you, you've come to the right place. I'm so glad that you're here. Okay, Reimagining Love listener, we are going deep today. We are going to sit together in all of the nuance and all of the tenderness of grief. You know, we're all going to experience loss again and again in our lives, and we are all going to be tasked with supporting the people we love through loss again and again in our lives. Loss that comes in the form of breakups and moves and divorces and illnesses, and of course, through death. So we desperately need grief literacy. And today I am bringing you a really gifted teacher, someone who is deeply steeped in the practices of loving and losing and grieving and rising. My guest today is a hospital chaplain whose life's work revolves around love and loss. J.S. Park interacts with patients before their deaths and with the loved ones who are preparing for and dealing with their passing, as well as patients experiencing physical and psychological losses following personal trauma and injury. He's a chaplain at a level 1 trauma center in Tampa, Florida, with more than 1,000 beds. So that means that JS wears many hats as a grief counselor and attendant at every trauma and death. In his work, he also supports end-of-life and staff care. Beyond the walls of the hospital, JS is an online educator, an author, and a 6th degree black belt. His recent book, As Long as You Need, Permission to Grieve, is an expansive, compassionate exploration of the many shared intricacies that make us human. In a time of grieving, whether at the bedside of a loved one or when serving as a supportive presence to another person's loss, so many of us struggle to, quote, say the right thing, end quote. We might opt for avoidance. We might offer platitudes because we've been taught that the end goal is closure. Well, As Long as You Need reframes the grieving process as existing well outside the bounds of time and space, encouraging us to contemplate compassion at every step of the journey. And in this episode, you're also going to hear JS and I speak to a listener question that comes from someone whose partner lost a parent about a year ago. This listener is wanting to be patient and supportive of her partner's grief, but she's also finding herself wanting some space to begin to look ahead and begin to imagine the future. I tell you what, I was on the verge of tears in all the best possible ways throughout this conversation. JS is a present and attuned conversation partner, one who is generous with his insights and his personal experiences. So take a deep breath, open up your heart, and prepare to receive JS Park. Enjoy. June, thank you so much for joining me here on Reimagining Love.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
I have so much I want to talk to you about. You have given us a really, really beautiful offering in your brand new book. I already have told my students about this book and referred it to clients already. So it's going to be a resource that I share a lot for many years to come. I want to start by asking you the relational self-awareness question that I ask all of the guests on Reimagining Love. Are you ready for it?
I'm ready.
Can you tell us a little bit, June, about how you are reimagining love in one of your important relationships these days?
Yes. So you can hear in the background my son, and I have a daughter who is now almost 4. You know, to be truthful, there was a time I did not want children at all. And I was scared. I was really scared of passing down intergenerational trauma, some mental health things I thought would be inherited. There was something in me that I love children, and I was scared of having children because of what I could potentially pass down. And I think those are related about I love children so much that I wouldn't want to pass anything on. So there's something about coming to the understanding that children don't enter the world necessarily a blank canvas. And I'm not going to pass on a blank canvas to my children. But I came to the understanding that I'm not only going to pass on things that are potentially hard, but also there are good things. Yeah, there are good things that we can pass across. And if it's true that trauma can be carried through genetics and can change our DNA, then certainly the imprint of our story, our heritage, our history, the way that we love, the way that we can show up in the world different and break the cycle, that can be passed on too. And so I continually reimagine love as my parents gave me what they could in the capacity that they had. They came from a war-torn and colonized and split and very difficult country. They grew up in a time where there wasn't much safety and there weren't many resources. And I just celebrated my son's 100 days. And we do that in Korea because 100 days was to be celebrated since the infant mortality rate was so high in Korea, in particular ancient Korea. And so there's something about the sorrow and celebration. There's both. And the way I'm reimagining love is there's a hard part of the story, but there's also good. And I'm finding the good, keeping the good. And that's what I hope to pass on to my children.
Thank you. I relate to that really deeply. I remember doing therapy in my 20s, and what I would say to my therapist is, I need to work on all of this so I don't pass it down. And I was almost like there was an urgency to my work. And I'm quite a bit further along in my parenting journey than you are. And I definitely have passed on all kinds of things to both of our children. But the thing that I'm proudest that I've passed on to is that I know in our house it's safe for them to tell me when something I've done or said feels hurtful or harmful or thoughtless or, hurts them in some way. And that to me is the best thing I've passed on, is that kind of like ability to go back and forth, because I can't be perfect. You can't be perfect. We know that kids don't need that. They don't need perfect, but they need the ability to give voice to whatever's happening inside of them.
The fear is still there. And yeah, and I think doing it scared, I mean, that's the way. That's what real courage is I used to think, I can fill up a courage meter until it reaches 100 and the fear meter reaches 0. And then I can go do the thing. But that's not how it works, right? We can have equal and mixed and blended parts, courage and fear, but it's in the middle of fear running for it and pursuing it. And we can't do it perfectly, like you said. And I'm doing my best to do it passionately. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I would love, in case there's anybody here listening who hasn't yet come in contact with your work, I'd love you to just speak a bit about who you are and the work that you do in the world as a hospital chaplain, because I think this is a role that we may not collectively understand as well as we need to. So just speak a little bit to that, please, about the work that you do out in the world.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that question. A hospital chaplain. I've been a chaplain now for almost 9 years. And so I think the technical and clinical definition of a chaplain is non-anxious, non-judgmental, comforting presence. And so sometimes chaplains are thought of as clergy, and certainly we have those kind of credentials. But in the hospital setting, in the hospital where I work, I attend every single death, every code blue. I work at a level 1 trauma center, so I attend every trauma. And that includes gunshot wounds, stabbing, fire, fall, drowning, car accident, everything that you can think of that's high acuity and requires immediate first response. And I'm the one who I find family, I establish the patient's identity, and I let the loved one know that their loved one is at the hospital and there's been an emergency. As you can imagine, that's an incredibly difficult phone call to make. Yeah. And so I guide them from the phone to the front door to bedside. And at deathbeds, I help with next steps if they need last rites or a prayer of blessing, spiritual counsel, or just comfort. That's what I come to bring. And I don't always bring up, in fact, I don't ever bring up religion unless my patient does, unless I know that it's comfortable for them. I'm not there to convert. I'm there to comfort. It's not to proselytize. I'm there as support. And so sometimes a visit might look like 45 minutes of a patient just talking and venting or weeping over their injury and illness. And it could be me barely saying anything except for maybe a prayer at the end, if that's what they need. With Code Blues, it's the same thing. Make a phone call, let their loved one know that there's been a crisis that's occurred. And then a lot of end of life support. There's so much that goes into decision making for family. That decision making involving what is best for my loved one. And these are hard questions because it's not always communicated what a patient may have wanted. Would they have wanted to stay on life support? Would they have wanted continual resuscitation efforts? And so navigating those things, understanding that that's moral, that's ethical, that's spiritual, that's an emotional decision, it's holistic. And so I come in between the medicine and the machines. There's something sacred and human about what I get to do. And, Alexandra, at the end of a shift sometimes, I look at my fellow chaplains, at shift report, and I'll ask sometimes, like, what do we do today? you know, do we give a dose of anything? Do we have, a plan of care? But that's not really what our work is. Our work is so much about humanizing. Today, in fact, in this interview, it'll be the most that I talk all week, probably. I do so much listening. And so I love what I do. It's been almost 9 years. It's incredibly hard. And I absolutely love what I do.
The work that you have done, the stories you have held. Well, I can't read the book without crying. I have tears in my eyes when I read it. I have tears in my eyes now trying to talk to you about it. It's breathtaking what you have done. You've brought us with you into so many spaces. And as my producer said, she said, it's a book about all the hard things of being human. It is a book certainly for those of us who are grieving, and we all are going to grieve at different moments in our lives, but it is as much a book for those of us in a moment when we aren't grieving as it is when we are grieving, because it really truly is about everything that makes us human. It's about living and losing and rising and connecting. It's a massive compassion expander, and there's something in it for everybody. So I'm so grateful that you did everything that you did to create this book at this moment in your journey with the work that you do and what you carry and process on a daily basis. I'm so glad that you offered this to us.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think the book was a needed thing for me. I don't want to center myself in it at all because it is about the work that I do and the patients I see. But there is something that I needed when I wrote that book. It was just as much a letter for me as it is for the reader. But I really appreciate that. It came out of so much, seeing so much. Really, it's almost like a love letter to the grieving, to let them know what you're going through is what you're going through. There is so much shame around grief. There is so much of a stigma still. We're getting better at it, but still so much. And I see it, in real time at bedside. What you said, I think you said expander. Mm-hmm. Is that the word you used?
It's a compassion expander.
And one of my words is expansive. It's kind of one of my key words and mantras that I take with me. So I love that you said expander. That's exactly what I'm hoping that it is.
That's how it feels. That's how it feels to read. It's a difficult read, but it's a really expansive read. So there's a question that I just, I've got there's 2 stars and highlighter all over this question. So I'm just going to go right to this one because I want to make sure that I get to this one. I'm thinking about how we receive very little to no sex education and little to no relationship education and little to no death education. And you have been near so many people who are dying. And so I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about how to be near someone who's dying. So if let's say that I'm at the bedside of a loved one of mine who is dying, what would you want to be whispering in my ear? What would you want me to know and remember and trust as I'm in that spot that many of us have been in, that many of us will be in? What do we need to know about how to be near someone?
So the number one thing I have noticed, I've seen now and have visited hundreds, if not thousands, of deathbeds. And many of those deathbeds, certainly, they're not always able to have the capacity to communicate, to speak as they would want to. And I think that's something that Hollywood often gets wrong. Dying patients don't often know when they're going to be able to give their last words. It's usually the living who say the last words to the dying. But I have seen when those who are dying are able to communicate, are able to express themselves. The number one thing I've seen is that they want to be seen. And that's the biggest thing that we can offer and provide. Because so many of us at the end, we realize these decisions that I've made, these paths that I followed, these particular exits that I took, I was following a lot of times someone else's vision for me. I wasn't following my own. And I didn't get to choose the things that I'd hoped to. It was just a couple degrees this way and that way. And what most people regret is that they couldn't live into themselves fully as they wanted. Sometimes that's because of resources and capacity or external and social things. And certainly that's why I try to fight that we can have those resources, that socially we can do better. And sometimes it is a person's own fear. It's their own anxiety. It's their own wanting to hide in order to survive. They didn't get to live into their identity, their dreams, their hopes. And so what can I do as a chaplain, as a human, for this person to be seen? And sometimes my patient will tell me the dream of their life that they wanted it to be. They'll tell me about this phantom life. And I get to hear about the vision that they had and the picture of this life that they're carrying. And even if it's the last 5 minutes, even if it's, just for 30 seconds where they get to express that, someone got to see them as they really wanted to be, as they really are. And so I'll hear confessions, but sometimes it's more than a confession. It's really a wish. It's really a dream spoken. I listened to a podcast recently. It was like a journalistic report where there are these retirement communities that by accident, they become monoethnic. There's one, I think even in Florida where I'm at, where without design, it wasn't by intention, this entire retirement community became filled with older Indian Americans. And so the theory, the speculation is that near the end, as mortality approaches, we want to be around those who get it, who see us, who have had a similar common overlap of story and experience. And that makes sense to me, you know. And so I open arms as wide as possible and keep my ears as low as I can to hear the last story, to hear the real story of my patient. And I think that's what we can offer. Even just to ask the question, it sounds like almost a negative question, but really a question of, is there anything that you wanted us to know? Is there anything that you wanted to do? Anything you wanted to be? Or not just stories that you lived, but what are stories that you hope to live? And I think that's okay, to ask. Zora Neale Hurston said, there's no greater agony than an untold story. And so I must also believe one of the greatest healings that we could have is to tell the story. And so how do we make room for that?
That's beautiful. And it runs counter to this idea that our quote unquote job as somebody who is near a person who's dying is to be whatever, positive or upbeat or gentle. So that question of what needs to be said or what story do you need to share or what's your wish for what could have gone differently? That does feel, right, quote unquote, negative and therefore contrary to how we think those messages of how we think we should be. We talk a lot on this show about closure. We talk about that in terms of breakup and divorce usually. But in the book, you say that there is no such thing as closure. So why not? And what is there instead? When we're in the wake of tragedy and loss, what is there if not a seeking of closure?
Yeah, when I hear the word closure, I understand the positive intent of that word. There's something about the last loop or the last stitch, or this wound is completely healed. It's been sutured, it's done, you're discharged, you get to go home free of injury. But so much of what happens in our lives when it's a difficult experience, even with wounds, They leave something behind. And in particular with loss, when someone goes, when someone dies, even when we think of loss, that's a hard deal. I see you go or you see me go. What a difficult deal that is. When we have built our life with someone, we stitch together these fixtures of joy and sorrow. And our memory, our life, we build something together with them that is fixed at all these different points in time. And so our memory is filled with sorrow, celebration, with love, with heartache, with experiences. It could be graduation. It could be the first time we bought this house. It could be this hard trial that we went through together. When they go, when they die, when they pass away, it's like every point of those fixtures, it's like it's ripped away and it leaves this void, this vacuum, just this rift. And what can actually bring closure to that? What can fill in all of those ripped away fixtures, that void, that vacuum? The only thing that could possibly maybe is if that person came back. And so our wounds, our trauma, our grief, there's not really so much closure as there can be something more like integration or embracing the memory and meaning of that person into our lives and not moving on from them, but moving with them, not letting them go, but letting them in, their entire story, the way that they are, who they were, and what they mean right now. You know, one of my best friends, it's now been 5 years since he died. It's 5 years this month. You know, I still talk to John and I still imagine, because he never got to meet my kids. He didn't even know I was writing a book. There's a lot that I imagine he would say right now. And if I were to kind of go the classic traditional narrative of closure means I'm just going to let that go, you know, well, letting him in means that I become bigger, not smaller. It doesn't shrink me. It expands, it enriches. And so I think sometimes from his perspective or what John might say. And so when we think of our ancestors, when we think of our parents, any of us who have someone that we've lost, it's scary to bring them in. You know, it's really scary to embrace them because they're gone and that pain is still there. And at the same time, there is an additional burden and pain of trying to suppress their memory, of trying to let them go, of trying to smooth it over with positivity. And so that additional burden has been given to us because there's something about hastening us back into the, productivity and hustle and institution. So.
And if it goes past 6 months, then you have a mental health diagnosis of prolonged grief disorder. So,
right.
Chop, chop. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So closure, sometimes I feel like it's weaponized. It minimizes our losses, and spiritually, emotionally, psychologically in itself is not healthy. And so grief really is about, how do I carry this memory with me, carry this person? And there is a way to hold it where it is still hard, but it is healing.
You know, for me, one of the most poignant explorations in the book was about your idea that grief is a time sickness, and that you share that before you were a chaplain, you really thought that grief was, primarily about the past and the loss of those past memories, but it's actually also about the future. So tell us about one of the lines that you write about this idea is the dream that didn't happen is as much of a loss as the one that did. So tell us about that, about grief as time sickness.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Just like we can be homesick, we can be time sick. And I did used to think that grief was just about missing the past, missing story. And certainly that's there. I was first inspired by this idea of memory loss of the future, or a loss of future memory, by Kate Bowler. She had written about it. And her book, Everything Happens for a Reason, Other Lies I've Loved. And she talks about, we don't just miss the past, we miss all the things that could have been. And I learned in chaplaincy that is a very specific type of grief called intrapsychic grief, where it doesn't seem to be a real tangible loss, but it's no different than a death, in which all the memories that we could have made together, the picture that we had in our head, it's now dissipated. We have to completely readjust. It's been dislocated. When I would sit with a patient, and just as I alluded to earlier, sometimes when they have this injury or illness that completely changes the trajectory of their lives, maybe because it's physical therapy, or they can no longer do the things they wanted to do, or they've lost this person. I've sat with patients, for example, who they're in a car accident. They may be the last person who's alive. Or if there's cancer, how much that's going to change about their family, their wishes, their career, all of it. Sometimes I will see family and friends, they think the best thing is to rush them towards readjustment, to rush them towards reintegrating back into livelihood, and well, it is what it is now, and here's what we got to do. And, don't look back. And, well, things are, we can't go back, that sort of thing. And as a chaplain, I will, when I discern that it's right, risk the question and navigate very gently, what were you on your way to? Or what were your hopes? Where were you heading towards? And they may tell me about this life that they didn't get to have. And sometimes I can see the room, if there's family there, friends there, maybe even other healthcare workers, where they kind of look at me like, you can't ask that, or you can't say that. Or I see this almost anxiety. But then when I look at my patient, it was almost like they were waiting for someone to ask them that question. We're so scared to talk about our losses, but I want to talk about it. I want to be able to share what I didn't get to have. And even if it's 5 minutes, just that small little window of time to be able to say, here's this thing that I lost. It's terrible that I've lost it, and it's so hard. And here's what I would have loved to have done. That brings so much relief, and it's not happiness. It's not like it makes it better. It doesn't fix it, but it is certainly in the moment a sort of visibility that is gained. And as a chaplain, that's one of those things where I dive into the hard things. And sometimes family and friends, they do see that, oh, they did need a chance to talk about this. And so just like with any kind of loss, there needs to be room to talk about it. And intrapsychic grief, it's one of those painful responses that need processing, that need open air to heal.
As you're talking, I'm sort of flashing on all the other moments in our life when the intrapsychic grief is so very real. I think often the couples I work with in therapy are there in the wake of infidelity, and the intrapsychic grief is so real of where would this marriage have been had this not happened, and until and unless that can be named of what had we been moving towards before we took this complete right-hand turn, then oftentimes the marriage doesn't survive an infidelity. But when I'm there, that's the question that we're at least exploring and sitting with. We can't talk about what's possible until we name and give voice to where they had been and where they had thought they were going, especially where the betrayed person thought they were going and the life they thought they were living.
Thanks for saying that, Alexandra. And I think it's important to name that even when we experience pain and something where our life has readjusted, where we're finally, going into this new timeline, experiencing pain doesn't mean that there hasn't been healing. My wife and I, we suffered a miscarriage last Easter. It's been a little over a year now. And now we have our son, who is almost 4 months old. But I still feel the pain, of course, of the miscarriage, of that loss. And, when we had our miscarriage, there were people who may have said things like, well, you can have another one. Or even, implied that wasn't a real loss, or, hey, at least you can have children, that sort of thing. Having a child now after that miscarriage, I sometimes think of him as our third child, Yeah, it doesn't make that pain go away. And so, half of my friends now that I've been at their wedding, I would say roughly half are divorced and have either remarried or they're dating. And they still grieve, even though they're happy. They're still grieving because of that life that they could have had. But that grief doesn't mean that they can't enjoy the life that they're having now. So I think holding those multiple truths, those multiple tensions, that is so important, because we think of getting over something as the pain is now completely gone and it's done, but it's not. We still hold that kind of life that we could have had, the ghostly image of it superimposed. And I think that's something to honor. That's not something to turn away from, but to look into.
You share that when you are with a family that has just lost someone, another one of the questions that you dare to ask in your work is, what were they like? What sort of a person were they? And that conversation ensues what you call a resurrection of sorts. And it's a defiance of death with stories of life. And you particularly tell a story of doing this with the family members of a woman named Rhonda, where they are telling you stories about her life and who she was. And each of them is kind of bringing a different facet of Rhonda. And they're laughing and crying. And then you write, I can almost see her. I weep for this family who must move into a world that will move without her. There's so much there. First of all, just your incredible empathy that you are so there with them and knowing that they're about to enter into this life without Rhonda in it. But I wonder if you can speak to how we, the non-chaplains of the world, could help our grieving friends and loved ones resurrect the person that they lost through remembrance. Like, how might we ask that question? What sort of person were they?
I think asking that as plainly as it is okay to ask. But I think the idea, the principle, the theme around it, I think people find it scary to even talk about the person that someone lost. So if I'm consoling a friend who just lost someone, I think in C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed, he, in the middle of his grief, said something like, I hate it when people bring it up and I hate it when they don't. And that tension, that fear, that anxiety around that, it's a very difficult discernment. But I think I've talked with people who have lost someone, not just at the hospital, but beyond that. And it's almost like my friends, my family, they're so scared to navigate this. They can't look at me. I just remind them of the loss. And I've heard of families where their children or their siblings, I haven't spoken with them in months, maybe because I look like the person that just, died. And so that fear, I think it's important to name that because it feels awkward, uncomfortable, it's unsettling to just bring up the dead. It almost feels like, am I being disrespectful? Am I bringing up something that's going to cause pain? But just like with depression and mental health, we learn in all the classes, it's okay to ask, have you felt this way recently? Have you had thoughts, suicidal ideation? We can ask directly because there is something painful about bringing it up, but there's also a release, almost like I've been waiting to talk about this. And asking that question, what were they like? Or bringing up a story about them, or even, is there something that you miss about them right now? In Korean culture, we have Chesa. Every year we celebrate not just birthday, but death days. And in Chesa, we celebrate and commemorate our grandmother or grandfather. For my father-in-law, every year we have a service where we get together and there's a laminated timeline. Yeah, we read out my late grandfather-in-law's accomplishments and the things that he achieved, like just a timeline of his life. And we each get to share a story about him. And I never got to meet him, but the question that I asked at this last service was, I just want to know, I'm asking my father-in-law, what did your dad laugh like? What did his laugh sound like? So we're all sitting at this table, and without missing a beat, my father-in-law, he did this laugh. And everyone at the table who knew his dad, they all pointed. They were like, yes, that's exactly how it sounds.
He nailed it.
Yeah.
Oh.
I remember my father-in-law just looking across the table, nodding, I think he was glad I asked that question. Bringing them back to life, that is a way of grieving. And that isn't something, sometimes we think of that as, is it unhealthy? Is it not okay?
Right. Is it reinforcing this denial or something like that? And it's not.
Yeah, it does make us bigger.
The question that you asked about your grandfather, your deceased grandfather-in-law, is so beautiful. It makes me think about when we lost our dad in 2012. And over the course of those days of like gatherings and funerals, I don't even know how this happened. It was almost like magical. I overheard each of my brothers, I have two younger brothers, and I overheard each of them being asked by, a loved one, what they're going to miss most about our dad. And they both gave the same exact answer, which was that they're going to miss how his face would light up when they walked in the room. Like, just like how he would be like, and I can hear, like, I can't often hear my dad's voice anymore, but I can hear him saying, "Hey, Matt," like the way that he would welcome my brother into a space. And it's just, that's the defiance of grief that you write about throughout the book, is that remembrance is a resurrection. And it's like the fact that after all these years, I can still hear that in my own head, and that your father-in-law can still create that laugh. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah. And, I think about sometimes the way that I sit is just like my dad. you know, I kind of lean over and I have this pensive, like focused look often when I'm at a table or something. And it's just like my dad. And I'm sure he got it from his dad. And then, yeah. And passing on life, passing on legacy, keeping our ancestors alive, alluding to earlier about children and parenting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
There's so much beauty in keeping alive the people in our lives that meant so much to us, and passing that on. And we do that intentionally, we do that unconsciously, but I love being able to make that choice to be able to keep them alive.
Mm-hmm. It's going to transition us beautifully into our listener question. So we have a listener question, and she uses she, her pronouns, and she's here in the US. And she writes, "My partner lost a parent last year. The loss was sudden, unexpected, and there were no goodbyes. My partner was immensely close to this parent. I've been trying my best to be respectful of the grief and be a supportive partner. And I know there is no timeline to grief, and the journey to find the strength to get back to life is unique for everyone. A challenge we have hit is that I want to continue living my life and look forward to things in life, and my partner finds it hard to. The grief also often affects our relationship in other ways. I'd appreciate your advice on how to navigate this challenge as a couple."
I think for families, for couples, for friendships, I've always seen that grief almost never runs parallel and equal side by side. It's always on different timelines. I've never seen two people have a congruent grief. Even when it's siblings who have lost a parent, multiple siblings, they're all on different timetables and on the emotional map, always in a different place. I visited patients where, 4 or 5 adult children have to make a decision. Do we remove life support? And they all have different ideas about how it should go. I think naming that is important, in that I validate that this person is in a completely different place than the other. I mean, for one, the relationship, of course, is much closer. This person has lost their parent. But I've seen also where sometimes the person who lost their parent, they're much further ahead than the, daughter-in-law or son-in-law, right? That can happen too. It is incredibly important, and this is not going to be a fix, and this is going to take time, and this may be even an obvious answer. But as much as we can't run parallel side by side exactly together in the same speed and tempo and pace, there are still overlaps and moments of meeting that can occur that will be able to move at the same pace. So sometimes 1 hour a week of therapy together, or in a grief group, being able to be in a setting where people are hurting, that can lend so much trust and relief, and being able to know that I'm not alone. And that can be huge for this person's partner. And also for this person's partner to know my partner is spending time with me in the overlap of our feelings. So doing things that move at the same pace, at the same speed, memorializing once a week, are we going to do it? Let's do an activity that would commemorate your parent who you just lost. This is something we can do that they love, that you want to do. Those kinds of things, not only they'll memorialize, and they'll also build trust, and they'll build growth together. And again, that's not a fix. It has to be something that's really meant, very intentional. It's not a trick or something that can just be done as a Band-Aid. And the other person will know if it is. It's something very genuine and sincere, where I'm going to come up with something, maybe a scrapbook, maybe just a picture together where that they had when they were younger, and frame it. Something nice where we know our partners, we know what they might need. Is there a favorite meal that parent once cooked? And those kind of moments of genuinely building trust together, memorializing will go a long way towards, I feel safe with this person. And part of that safety can also lead to that person's healing so that they can more and more be able to integrate that loss into their own lives. And again, I have to caution that's not a fix. And it's very obvious when it is. Now, if this person just lost their parent, I'm guessing it sounds like in this question within the last year or so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's so fresh. That's still so new. And I can see why the partner might find it stressful, especially in this beginning initial phase. And, that when I say a beginning initial phase, in 10 years, it can feel like day one, right? I want to put that disclaimer there. But I would say for the person who asked this question, just to have gentleness and grace for yourself and time for yourself too. When we are with a loved one who is hurting, we in some measure also hurt. And we in some measure don't get everything that we need out of that relationship. There's wounding there that happens unintentionally. And it's very difficult. That person may act out or lash out, or in their grief, they may say things that they don't mean. So for this person who wrote that question, if you feel anger, if you feel distress, that makes sense. And your partner may not be the one that you process that with. It may require your own therapist. It may require your own friends. It may require your own community. And so when we see someone hurting, if they offend us and hurt us, and then we process back, that can be more hurtful. And that just creates this bad feedback loop. So we may have seen that picture. I think it was a LA Times or Washington Post article. It's now a very popular picture among processing where here's the person who's hurting, and then there's concentric circles. And so the person who's hurting, when they share with you, you don't dump back into them. You pour outside the circle, right? And it keeps going to friends, colleagues, or therapists, something like that. But the picture, the idea is that we go process outwards. We don't dump back in. And so for this person who wrote the question, I know the inclination is, I want to share everything that this person is making me feel because it's not fair. Your feelings are right and valid. But I think the direction in which we process is incredibly important to maintain the sanctity and the trust in that relationship. It's all very hard. It is all really unfair. It's hard on both of you. It's not just hard on the person who lost, but the person who's with that person. So I validate those feelings, and I hope there's gentleness and grace for yourself in this too.
Yeah, there's nothing, there's nothing I can add besides you've offered our listener so much. And I hear the patience and the care, in her question, right? She's hurting and she's wanting so much to be patient and present and kind to her partner. And that counts for so much. And I think what she wants for the two of them, of being able to continue to dream as a couple and build as a couple, what she wants, it's so needed. It's so necessary. So she's got her finger on the pulse of something that is just really loving. And I can see how there's a risk of, the more she's got that energy of, can we maybe go have a little fun? Can we maybe? Then perhaps the more that evokes for her grieving partner, whatever feelings there are of the pain, and layered on with the guilt, and layered on with the feeling of I'm a disappointment to my partner. And so I love the idea of some relational care for the two of them, because as you said, it is not at all easy for the partner who's lost this parent who is so dear. And it's not at all easy for our listener who is dealing with that intrapsychic grief that we had named earlier of she's lost the partnership that she had when they were both kind of clicking along and, exploring whatever they were exploring in that moment. And that has gotten sidelined by grief that nobody asked for and nobody wanted and that nobody can wish away,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
June, I have loved this conversation, and I hope that we can keep finding ways to weave our paths together because you are such an incredible resource. I was looking this morning, I peeked at your Amazon reviews, and somebody had written in one of your reviews, we are lucky to have such a wonderful soul among us who can live so genuinely and write such heart-filling prose.
Oh.
And that is just so real. That is just you. You're just magnificent. Thank you so much for being here today. Really, truly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alexandra. I appreciate you, your platform, your space, your voice, your work. And I'm thankful for you. So thank you.
Yeah. So we'll have links in the show notes of where people can find your new book, which is called As Long as You Need, Permission to Grieve, as well as your first book, as well as your beautiful social media feed. But what else? What else do people need to know about you and where to learn more from you and with you?
Yep, I'm on all the social media things. I am really excited that I'm working on 2 things at once right now for books, kind of maybe a follow-up. I mostly post on Instagram. I try to answer messages as much as I can and comments. I should have better boundaries, but I just love
I hear you.
interact. I really love engaging with people. So yeah, please find me there. I would love to chat with you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, J.S. Park, for taking the time to share and reflect deeply on your practice and on the important resource that you have shared with the world in the form of your latest book, As Long as You Need, Permission to Grieve. And to you, Reimagining Love listener, I hope this conversation and this book encourage you and encourage all of us to investigate our relationship with grief and the tension between sorrow and celebration in the loss of a loved one. You can learn more about JS's work and where you can find your own copy of As Long as You Need in the show notes. Until next time, be well. Reimagining Love is produced by Emily Reeves and edited by Mary Chan and Katie Pagich of Organized Sound Productions. Our theme music was composed by Slade Warnkin. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.